They say there is no escape from chaos, that once its shadow touches your soul, no prayer, no purge, no emperor's mercy can cleanse what festers within. Across the endless stars of the Imperium, countless worlds bear silent witness to this truth. Hive cities crumble not from bombardment, but from the whispers in the dark corners of their manufactoria. Regiments of the Astra Militarum vanish into the warp, their names erased, their honor sealed behind the sigils of the Inquisition. And those few who return, if they can still be called human, bring with them echoes of laughter, not born of any mortal throat. This is not the tale of the heretic. It is the story of what becomes of those who dare to defy chaos, who think they can outlast its hunger, who believe their faith is strong enough to look upon the abyss and remain whole. For in the grim darkness of the far future, chaos does not merely kill. It consumes. It corrupts. It endures, patient and eternal, until all who stand against it learn the same truth, that resistance has a cost. The Imperium itself cannot measure before we descend into the shadows, into the vaults where the light of the Emperor falters. Join the ranks of our growing crusade. Like, share, and subscribe to Stories of the Imperium, so that these forbidden tales of loyalty, damnation, and survival may continue to echo across the void. Let the Vox carry our message to every corner of the galaxy, where even the silence fears to tread. The sky above Cathedral 4 was no longer a sky. It was a wound, raw, open, bleeding fire into the void. Every heartbeat seemed to echo with the thunder of orbital bombardment, each impact a hammer blow against the faith of billions. The heavens themselves burned as Imperial ordnance fell in sheets of molten light, carving through the spires and hab blocks like a divine scythe. I remember the color of it, not red, not gold, but something crueler, a hue that lived between agony and awe. Ash fell like snow, thick enough to choke the lungs, and the air reeked of ozone and vaporized metal. Somewhere in the haze, a choir still sang, their hymn warping through broken Vox amplifiers, the words lost to static and despair. The manufacturum hive of Cathedral Prime had once been a monument to Imperial industry, a forest of steel cathedrals and smoke-belching towers. Now it was a grave that hadn't yet realized it was dead. Civilians huddled beneath the broken effigies of the Emperor, faces lit by the red glow of burning promethium. Their prayers rose with the ash, their whispers frantic, desperate promises of repentance screamed into a sky that no longer listened. I walked among them once, when this city still breathed. Now, the streets that had echoed with the roar of machines and the rhythm of labor were silent, save for the crackle of burning fuel and the sobbing of those left behind. Through the haze came the Astra Militarum, the 43rd Vostra, marching through fire and ruin. Their faces were hidden behind rebreathers, their eyes unreadable behind cracked visors. They moved like ghosts, boots crunching over glass and bone. The banners they carried were more ash than cloth now, the once proud Aquila barely visible through the soot. Yet still they marched, their discipline unbroken, even as the world around them fell apart. I heard one of them whisper a catechism before the next bombardment hit. The Emperor protects. But his voice trembled, and when the dust cleared, the soldier who had spoken was gone, buried beneath what had once been a cathedral dome. The Voxnet was chaos. Command channels screamed for reinforcement that would never come. Officers barked orders into dead air, trying to hold together formations that no longer existed. Somewhere above the clouds, the fleet continued its work, orbital fire so relentless it drowned out thought. The city was being erased, district by district, until even the idea of resistance felt absurd. Yet still, denial held strong. The officers swore that victory was close. The priests said this was a test. The soldiers believed, because belief was all that was left. But belief could not stop the sky from burning, and then something changed. It began as a tremor, faint, like the air itself was shivering. The bombardment's rhythm faltered for a heartbeat, a wrong note in an otherwise divine symphony of destruction. The light around us wavered, colors bending at the edge of sight. Some said it was a malfunction in the atmospheric shielding, others that the heat had warped the optics. But I remember the feeling in my bones, that sense of being watched, not by enemy scouts or orbiting augurs, but by something deeper, older, the kind of gaze that doesn't simply look at you, it looks through you. The priests began to chant louder, trying to drown out the unease. Their incense burned thick and bitter, filling the air with a stench of sanctified oil. I saw one servitor collapse mid-step, its flesh blistering as its augmetic limbs spasmed. Machine spirits howled through broken cogitators, vox grills warping with feedback that almost sounded like words. The light of the bombardment pulsed once, bright enough to turn night into day, and then faded abruptly, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt alive. The fire still burned, but it no longer crackled. The air hung heavy, thick with soot and something else, something that hummed faintly, like the echo of a thought that wasn't yours. The soldiers shifted uneasily, their lasguns raised but unfired. No enemy had been sighted for hours, and yet every shadow seemed to breathe. One by one, they began to notice the statues. The massive marble visages of the emperor that had towered over the plaza. They were different. The faces seemed stretched somehow, the expressions distorted, like the stone itself had softened under unseen heat. The senior officer, a captain whose name I never learned, ordered the men to hold formation. His voice was calm, but his hand trembled when he drew the aquila from his chestplate and kissed it. In the flicker of his lumen lamp, I saw tears on his cheeks. He whispered that this was not the work of men, nor heretics, nor any weapon of war. It was judgment, and perhaps he was right, because in that silence, that perfect, suffocating stillness, something moved within the ruins. A ripple of darkness, just beyond the light, too fast to see yet too vast to ignore. The vox crackled again, for the first time in hours. And through the static came a single phrase, spoken in a voice that did not belong to any man of the Imperium. They remember. Then the channel went dead. The fire died. But the silence that followed was worse when the guns fell silent. It was not peace that followed. It was something colder. The bombardment ended as if the heavens themselves had grown tired, leaving behind a city that no longer remembered sound. The air was thick with ash and the metallic temps of burnt promethium, the kind that clung to your tongue and refused to leave. From the ruins of manufactoria and shattered shrines, the survivors began to crawl out, blinking, coughing, trembling like insects fleeing the light. They looked up at a sky still pulsing faintly red from orbital fire and could not tell if it was dawn or simply the world still bleeding. The grand basilicas of Cathedral Prime lay in ruins. Their vaulted roofs collapsed, their marble saints headless and blackened. Yet even now the candles still burned. Their tiny flames flickered amid the wreckage, stubbornly refusing to die. Each one reflected in pools of congealed wax and blood. Some said it was a miracle proof that the emperor's light could not be extinguished. Others whispered that it was an omen, that fire, this stubborn, was not holy at all. The air stank of incense and rot, the two scents twining until you couldn't tell where sanctity ended and decay began. It was then that the priests emerged, from the catacombs beneath the ecclesiastical quarter, where they had hidden during the bombardment. They came forth chanting. The survivors gathered to listen, their faces pale and hollow in the half-light. Leading them was Confessor Marin, tall, thin, his robes torn, his eyes burning with something that was not entirely faith. He moved through the rubble as if each step were penance, his rosarius swinging from a trembling hand. The vox grills of the servitors beside him crackled with corrupted hymns, static mixing with prayer. "The Emperor tests us," Marin cried, his voice breaking. "He measures our faith in flame." But the words rang hollow against the silence. The people listened, yes, but their eyes were empty. They were no longer praying for victory, only for meaning. A mother clutched her child, both streaked with ash. A soldier, his lasgun, long since melted into slag, bowed before a shattered aquila, mouthing verses that no longer sounded like words. Even the servitors seemed to hesitate in their endless rituals, their augmetic limbs twitching mid-motion, as though something unseen were interfering with their programming. Marin felt it too, that subtle wrongness in the air, a vibration beneath the skin. As night fell, the city changed again. The smoke thickened, settling into alleys like a living thing. From the ruins came the sound of whispering, too soft to understand, too constant to ignore. The statues that had survived the fire began to weep thick streams of oil that gleamed black in the starlight. It ran down their faces like tears, dripping onto the cracked marble floors. The priests declared it sacred, the emperor mourning his children, but the scent of it was wrong. Sweet, metallic, and alive. When the first man tried to touch it, he screamed until his throat tore open. The oil burned cold. In the darkness, the voxcasters began to speak. No one had powered them, yet one by one they flickered to life, voices emerging through static. They recited liturgies, but not any known to the ecclesiarchy. The phrasing was familiar, but the words twisted. Each verse carried the echo of something vast, something listening. Confessor Marin stood before one such device, its speaker hissing like a serpent, and asked who was transmitting. The reply came after a pause, a voice that almost sounded like his own, whispering the same question back at him. By the second night, fear had become its own form of worship. People lit candles in patterns that made no sense, tracing symbols they couldn't remember learning. Marin saw them kneel before broken idols, muttering prayers that sounded less like devotion and more like bargaining. He tried to stop them, but every protest died in his throat, because part of him, a part he didn't dare acknowledge, began to feel it too. The sense that their prayers were being heard, just not by the one they intended. In the moments before dawn, the shadows seemed to breathe. They pooled unnaturally, gathering around the surviving shrines. Marin held his staff tight, its sigil glowing faintly, his knuckles white. He whispered the litanies of protection until his voice gave out. And still, the air hummed, a low resonant sound that vibrated through his chest like the echo of distant machinery. He realized then that faith was not light. It was weight, crushing, endless, suffocating. And in that weight, something vast was stirring. When the sun finally rose, it brought no warmth. The light was pale, drained, as though it had passed through something on its way down. The faithful knelt together in the square, waiting for their salvation. And when they opened their eyes to the first glow of morning, they found that their prayers had indeed been answered, but not by the emperor. Dawn came red, not the soft red of sunrise, but the deep arterial hue of a wound that would not close. The light bled through the smoke, diffused by ash and the drifting remnants of lives burned away. From the manufacturing spires, the air shimmered with heat and ruin, and beneath it something stirred. The vox channels hissed without signal, and the hymns that once filled the city had fallen silent. Only the wind remained, and even that carried voices that did not belong to the living. The 43rd. Vostroyan had gathered what was left of its strength. Lines of soldiers, soot-blackened and hollow-eyed, formed ranks along the plaza before the shattered cathedral of St. Leoran. Their uniforms were little more than scorched cloth and stubborn faith. Officers barked orders into dead vox-links, their words dissolving into static. The air was heavy, thick with promethium smoke, and the faint taste of copper, the scent of blood that never quite dried. Somewhere beyond the manufacturing ruins, something was moving. They could hear it between the gusts, footsteps too slow, too deliberate. Confessor Marin stood at the front, his robes torn to ribbons, his once white vestments stained a dull brown. His eyes were fever-bright, fixed on the horizon where the smoke parted and figures began to emerge. At first they looked human, silhouettes stumbling forward through the haze. Workers, soldiers, civilians, survivors. But then the light shifted and the illusion broke. Their movements were wrong, too fluid, too silent, faces half-formed, flesh like cooled wax. They wore the memory of men, but spoke in the stuttering cadence of broken vox machines. The first rank of guardsmen opened fire. Losbolts ripped through the shapes, cutting them apart, but the smoke only folded back, twisting and reforming into new outlines. Bayonets flashed, grenades tore through the air, but nothing bled. Every impact only scattered them, and every moment they returned thicker, darker, hungrier. The soldiers began to fall back, their discipline eroding into terror. One man dropped his weapon and began to pray, his voice cracking as he called for the Emperor's light. The shadows answered first. Marin raised his staff, its aquila sigil flickering weakly in the dimness. He shouted the litanies of purity, the same words that had carried him through decades of service. But each syllable echoed strangely, as if the city itself were repeating them in mockery. Around him, the statues wept again, not oil this time, but something darker, thicker, that hissed when it touched the ground. The confessor's voice faltered. For the first time, he wondered if his faith had ever been his own, or merely another mask worn by whatever now haunted Cathelion. For rumors had begun to spread through the ranks, whispered between dying breaths, carried on the last fragments of functioning vox lines. They spoke of a relic buried deep beneath the manufactorum, an ancient machine unearthed by the rebellion before the bombardment began. Some called it a conduit, others a weapon. A few claimed it pulsed with the rhythm of the warp itself. No one could agree on what it was, only that it hummed a steady, pulsing beat like a heart buried beneath steel and stone, and that, since its awakening, the city had begun to dream. Moran felt its pull. Even as the world fell apart around him, his thoughts returned again and again to that pulse, slow, deliberate, endless. He could feel it beneath his feet, through the cracked flagstones, through the bones of the dead. A rhythm older than faith, older than the Imperium itself. Some said it promised salvation. Others whispered that it was merely the echo of something vast, something patient, listening from beyond. The confessor no longer knew which to believe, but he had to see it, even if it damned him. The Astra Militarum final defense collapsed by dusk. The Manufacturum's last functioning reactor went critical, its death throes lighting the horizon like a false dawn. The screams of the dying blended with the chants of the priests, their prayers devolving into rhythmless noise. In the cathedrals and trenches alike, men and women clutched their relics and whispered to the silence. They asked for deliverance, for mercy, for meaning, but the silence only deepened, not empty, but full of something vast and hungry. When Marin finally reached the Manufacturum's heart, the air trembled with energy. The relic stood before him, a machine of impossible design, half organic. It pulsed with a slow, steady light, each throb resonating with the rhythm of his heartbeat. For a moment, he saw reflections within it, faces of those lost. The Emperor's golden halo, the burning sky, all collapsing into one endless image. His faith screamed, his mind fractured, and still he reached out his hand. As his palm brushed the surface, the machine answered, not in words, but in understanding. The realization that some prayers are not meant to be heard, that some devotions lead not to redemption, but revelation, and revelation is never merciful. Cathedral 4 burned. The hymns turned to static. The last transmission from the surface carried no words, only a low, rhythmic pulse, like the echo of a heart still beating beneath the ash. Then, silence as the fleets above reoriented and left the system. Their auspex arrays recorded faint, residual signals, patterns repeating in the dust, mimicking Imperial Vox code. But no one listened, and beneath the ashes, something whispered back. The descent began at dusk. Though dusk had little meaning beneath the burned sky of Cathedral 4, the air was thick with iron dust, every breath rasping through filters half clogged with soot. The survivors, what remained of the 43rd, Vostroyan and the civilians they'd sworn to protect, moved in a line through the shattered Manufactoria gates, guided only by the flicker of lumen lamps and the promise that something below might still be untouched by the fire. Behind them, the world above burned in silence, the bombardment now distant thunder across a broken horizon. Ahead lay the Underhiver labyrinth of rusted arteries that had once fed the city's veins with labor, fuel, and faith. The first steps were the hardest. The metal beneath their boots groaned like something alive, the weight of centuries pressing down in every rivet and beam. Every sound carried to far-dripping condensation, the whisper of shifting debris, the slow, deliberate creak of cooling pipes. The air tasted of machine oil and copper. It was not darkness they entered, but a kind of blindness, a place where the light itself seemed hesitant. One of the engineers whispered a litany to the machine god, tracing the cogwheel sign against his chest. Another muttered that the Omnissiah had long abandoned this place. Neither sounded convinced. Down here, faith was measured not in prayer, but in silence. The deeper they went, the more the walls seemed to breathe. Condensation slid down the bulkheads in slow, deliberate beads. The pipelines groaned as though exhaling. Even the air recyclers, long dormant, stirred faintly when they passed us, if responding to their presence. A Vox unit crackled on someone's belt, the static almost rhythmic, a heartbeat. No, impossible. And yet, when they paused, the sound stopped. When they moved again, it returned. Guardsman Loran felt it first not fear, but recognition. A strange familiarity in the hum of the machinery, as though it knew him. He'd worked manufacturing lines before the draft, his hands calloused from years of tending furnaces and conveyor chains. The sounds here spoke the same language, but twisted slower, deeper, almost mournful, as if the machines remembered what they once were, and what they had lost. They reached a junction where the tunnels split in 6 directions, each one marked with rusted sigils no one could read. The sergeant ordered a halt. Promethium lamps cast long shadows that bled across the walls, merging with the grime. It was there that they noticed the stains. Dark streaks running along the pipes, thick and sluggish. Someone reached out to touch it before another shouted for him to stop. The liquid clung to the surface like blood refusing to dry. Its smell was sharp chemical, but not unfamiliar. Promethium, yes. But beneath that, something else. The metallic sweetness of decay. They pressed on, led by the faint pulse of a flickering emergency beacon somewhere below. The sound of machinery grew louder, no longer random but patterned grinding. Pausing, grinding again in a rhythm too organic to ignore. The tunnel floor shifted underfoot, soft in places where it should have been solid steel. When one of the civilians stumbled and tore open the plating, what spilled out wasn't coolant. It was tissue fibrous, pink, threaded through with copper wire. They sealed the hole in silence. Loran couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched not by eyes, but by something that was the walls themselves. The vents whispered, the gears turned even when untouched. Cogitator banks flickered to life as they passed, their cracked screens scrolling lines of data that spelled out nothing but broken words. Fragments of prayers half-coded, repeating endlessly, Creator, return. Remember, the servitors they'd found earlier, fused into their charging ports, now twitched as the group drew near, their augmetic limbs trembling in staccato bursts. One opened its mouth, Vox Grill stuttering as it spoke a single phrase in a voice not its own. We see you. By the time they reached the old transit hub, half the company refused to speak. The air was too thick, the hum too loud, vibrating in their bones. The sergeant ordered them to make camp. Marin's name passed in hushed tones. Someone said he'd gone deeper days ago, chasing rumors of a signal that promised sanctuary. Loran checked his Auspex scanner. The readings were erratic interference from the metal all around, perhaps. Yet there was a frequency beneath the noise, faint but deliberate. A voice distorted beyond recognition, repeating coordinates deeper into the hive. A voice that called them by name. As they rested, the walls pulsed again just once, subtle but unmistakable. Dust fell from the ceiling. Somewhere far off, a machine screamed a sound like tortured steel, or something imitating it. Loran's hand tightened around his lasgun, though he knew it would mean nothing here. He thought of the world above, burning in silence, and wondered which hell was worse, the one of fire, or the one that remembered. Then, through the static of the Vox, came a whisper, garbled, human, urgent. Down here, sanctuary. Follow the light. The signal cut out, but the pulse remained, steady, insistent, coming from below. The sergeant ordered the squad to prepare, and as they gathered their gear, none of them noticed that the walls had stopped breathing. They were listening instead. The descent into the sublevels of Cathelian 4 felt like walking through the veins of a dying god. Every lumen strip flickered with an anemic pulse, casting the survivors in half-light that made their faces look like wax masks stretched over ghosts. The air was thick with the taste of oil and rust, every breath cutting dry through the throat, as though the manufactorum itself resisted the presence of the living. Somewhere far above, the war still raged, the thunder of artillery, the choking roar of Promethean fires. But here it was all silence and whispers, the kind of silence that waits. Sister Amara led us forward, her rosarius faintly glimmering with each heartbeat. The survivors followed her like pilgrims trailing behind a reluctant saint. The vox on Sergeant Callus's belt still hissed with the signal, a voice wrapped in distortion, repeating coordinates that did not exist on any Imperial map. The words came in broken rhythm, as though the speaker were half submerged in water or machinery. It was not a voice of command. It was a summons. We passed through what had once been a mechanicus sanctum, vast, skeletal halls filled with the relics of devotion long abandoned, brass skulls adorned with circuitry, rusted servo arms twitching with dying reflexes, fragments of binary prayers carved into the walls. Once the Magi had ruled here with absolute authority, their logic entwined with faith. Now their dominion lay rotting in silence. Yet the silence felt inhabited. It felt aware. The servitors were the first to appear, hundreds of them. Suspended from cables, their bodies half fused into the walls. Their flesh was pale and motionless, veins replaced by copper tubing. But their mouths moved. Every few seconds, one of them exhaled a burst of static. A wordless chant filtered through vox grills, heavy with corrosion. Together, their fragmented voices merged into something almost melodic, a hymn made of broken circuits and forgotten devotion. Sister Amara halted. She looked up, the faint lumen glow reflecting off the moisture on her cheeks. "They're praying," she whispered. "Emperor, preserve us. They're praying." Callus muttered a curse and raised his lasgun. "They're dead things, sister. Just echoes." But Amara shook her head. "Echoes don't know your name, because that's when we heard it. A whisper from the servitors' chorus, soft at first, then spreading like a ripple through metal. Amara, it was the sound of rust grinding inside a skull, of memory forced through a machine that should not remember." The others took a step back. She didn't. The hymn rose, gaining rhythm, a cadence too deliberate to be random, static. The words were beyond human, chanted in a language of data and agony, yet there was recognition in them. The sound made the walls tremble, the lumen strips flicker faster, as if the machines themselves joined the song. Amara clutched her rosarius tighter, knuckles whitening around its edge. "You hear it too," she said. "It's not calling for death. It's calling for remembrance." And in that moment, it happened. The walls seemed to move. The metal plates swelled inward and out, like lungs drawing breath. Steam hissed through vents like sighs escaping ancient throats. The ground vibrated faintly, a heartbeat echoing through the floor plates, syncing with the pulse of the signal. Even Callus lowered his weapon, his eyes darting around in disbelief. We were standing inside something alive, or something that once had been. Amara stepped closer to one of the Its eyes were blind lenses, but when her shadow passed over its face, the lips twitched. "You remember him," she murmured, "don't you?" The servitor's vox sparked, a burst of static rising like a breath drawn after centuries. From that noise, a single sound formed, a tone so low it shook dust from the girders. The machines were answering her prayers, but their devotion was not directed to the Emperor. It was directed to the memory of him, a reflection of worship left imprinted in the iron, replaying endlessly long after flesh had forgotten. The manufacturer remembered faith as a system remembers a command. But commands, once corrupted, evolve. The temperature dropped. The air filled with a low resonance, a mechanical hum that throbbed like blood through arteries. I felt it in my teeth, in my bones. Callus whispered something, maybe a prayer, maybe a curse. Amara simply listened, her eyes wide, lips moving in silent reverence. "They're not corrupted," she said softly. "They're faithful." Faith translated into code. And then the signal, the one we had followed all this way, flared again, stronger than before. No longer distant. It pulsed in perfect time with the rhythmic hum of the machines, like a heartbeat finding its match. The servitors went still, their song silenced in an instant. Only the pulse remained, coming from deeper below. Amara turned to us, the glow from her rosarius flickering like a dying star. "It's leading us," she said. To the vault. The walls shuddered once, like a sigh of relief or warning. Then silence returned, absolute and suffocating. We followed her deeper, guided by that steady, impossible heartbeat echoing through the metal world beneath our feet. The vault waited for us, like a mouth sealed, shut against the centuries. Its doors were carved from adamantine, their surface scoured by time and battle alike. Yet the sigil of the cult Mechanicus still lingered there, the half-broken cog, the faded skull, and beneath it, a warning burned into the metal omnicia absent. The words alone carried weight. To declare the machine god's absence was heresy beyond measure. Even whispering such a phrase could damn an entire world. And yet, someone or something had carved it here. The air around the vault was different, heavy, saturated with static and dust, so fine it clung to the tongue like ash. The lumen strips we'd carried flickered, their light struggling to compete with the faint crimson glow that bled from the vault's seams. It wasn't light as much as it was awareness. The hum beneath our feet had grown steady now, no longer distant. Like a pulse, calm, patient, expectant. Sister Amara stepped forward first. The rest of us hesitated, not out of fear, but reverence. The closer she came to the door, the more her rosarius dimmed, its sanctified light waning as though unwilling to intrude. She pressed her gauntlet to the surface, and the vault shuddered, responding with a deep groan of shifting gears. The symbols along its rim flared to life in dull red sequence, binary prayers running backward, like the unmaking of a litany. Then the doors opened. The sound was not of machinery, but of breathing inside. The space was immense, a cathedral of metal, ribs and cables that descended into darkness. The walls pulsed faintly with internal light, veins of energy running in slow, deliberate rhythm. The smell was thick, copper, oil, and something faintly organic, the scent of flesh sealed in machinery. And at the center of it all, suspended within a lattice of steel, hung the relic. It was enormous, shaped vaguely like a human torso, though half its body was a mass of conduits, pistons, and coils that merged into the vault's architecture. Its surface was marked by the symbols of the Mechanicus, though they had been overwritten by something older, something alien in geometry and intent. Its skull-like head was turned downward, as if in mourning. Tubes ran from its chest into the floor, feeding into the hive itself. It wasn't a construct. It was an anchor. We stood in silence. Even Callus lowered his weapon. Then, without warning, it moved. Not a twitch, not a breath, but a vibration so deep it made the bones in our legs tremble. The light from the walls intensified, filling the chamber with a red so bright it became almost white. Vox statics screamed in our ears, and then the world went quiet. When the machine spoke, it wasn't through sound. It was through us. Pain lanced through my skull, sharp and cold, like a needle driven behind the eyes. The others fell too, convulsing, clutching at their heads as the memories came. Not our own. A flood of visions, endless corridors of light, forges burning beneath planets, priests of metal kneeling before a sun of circuitry. The taste of molten copper, the scent of incense burned over oil. And behind it all, a single emotion so vast it drowned everything else. Remembrance. It wasn't just data. It was grief. We saw the first forges of Mars, the rise of the cult Mechanicus, the forging of belief itself into steel. We saw the moment flesh was declared imperfect, and the moment that declaration began to rot. The machine remembered every prayer, every scream, every offering ever fed into its gears. It remembered the omniscience silence. It remembered being abandoned. When it released us, we were gasping, drenched in sweat that reeked faintly of oil. Callus vomited blood. It ran black and metallic across the floor. Sister Amara knelt before the relic, tears streaking through the grime on her face. Her lips trembled as she whispered a broken litany. But her voice faltered midway because the machine, that thing, had begun to move again. Its head lifted, cables straining, a single eye igniting in the hollow of its skull. The walls responded to it, contracting and expanding in rhythm with its pulse. The entire vault became alive with resonance, a vibration that wasn't just sound, it was feeling, the kind that reached beneath language, beneath thought. Amara looked up, and for a moment, I swear she smiled. It's not a god, she breathed. It's memory itself. The machine remembers what humanity forgot. Then the machine exhaled, a wave of heat and pressure rolling through the vault. The lights dimmed, then flared again, bathing everything in a sickly gold. I felt it enter my skin, the rhythm seeping into my veins, a quiet hum that synced with my heartbeat. The others stirred too, touching their chests, their throats. Hearing something beneath their own pulse, the machine had learned us, and as the great doors began to seal, locking us once more in shadow, I could still hear it, faint, rhythmic, inside my head. My name, spoken in static, the vault sealed with a final hiss, and the hum did not fade. We were no longer just survivors. We were part of its song, the Sanctus Veritas, drifted in orbit like a cathedral of Judgment, its hull blackened by re-entry burns, its silhouette veiled in the ash clouds of the dead world below. The remains of Cathalion glowed faintly through the viewport, its atmosphere split by firestorms that never ended. The manufactoria were gone, the hive towers broken into veins of molten glass. Yet the Vox still whispered from its surface, voices that refused to die, voices that should not exist. Inquisitor Kael'Varn stood at the command pulpit, his reflection caught in the reinforced glass, part man, part shadow. The faint incense from the ship's chapel still clung to his robes, mixed with the copper sting of sterilizing oils. Around him, servitors chanted litanies of data purification, their eyes like dull candles flickering against the dark. Each mechanical prayer was meant to drown out what lingered on the Vox. It didn't. Kael's hand rested over the inquisitorial rosette pinned to his chest, a symbol of divine authority forged in fire and oath. Yet tonight it felt heavier than ever, like an anchor dragging him toward something unseen. He had hunted demons before, purged cults that worshipped the warp under the guise of faith. But what festered beneath Cathelion was different. It wasn't born of madness. It was remembering. His interrogator, a pale woman named Vexa, approached with the precision of a blade. "Transmission fragments continue from the subcrustal layers," she reported, voice calm but strained. "They mimic our own encryption patterns using ciphers, not active since the Great Crusade." Cale didn't respond immediately. He traced a line of scripture etched into the pulpit's "Edge to know is to purge." The words had guided him for decades. Now they mocked him. And what do the fragments say? "They're not words, my lord, they're invocations, please, sometimes orders, sometimes confessions." She hesitated, eyes flicking to the floor. "Sometimes they use your name." The Inquisitor's breath slowed. The hum of the engines became a heartbeat behind his ears. "My name. Yes, my lord," but spoken backwards, as if remembering it wrong. For a long moment, Cale said nothing. The only sound was the ticking of the Auspex arrays, recalibrating against the radiation storms. Somewhere deep in the ship, a child wailed, Psychoborn, one of the hundreds kept aboard for containment and study. The black ship always sounded alive. It was part of its penance. "Prepare an extraction team," Cale finally said. "We'll descend at dawn." Vexa bowed and withdrew, her steps measured, her faith unshaken, or so it seemed. Cale watched her leave, then turned his gaze back to the planet's burning surface. His reflection blurred in the viewport. The robes of an Inquisitor, the eyes of a man who no longer recognized himself. He closed his eyes and whispered the litanies of clarity. The words were meant to cleanse the mind of doubt, to silence heresy before it took root. But the syllables caught in his throat. For every phrase he recited, another voice whispered it back deeper, slower, almost reverent. It wasn't a corruption. It was mirroring. Cale's hands trembled, only slightly. He hid them in his sleeves. Doubt was a sin. Fear a luxury. He could not afford either. The Sanctus Veritas drifted on, its engines whispering through the void. In its lower decks, the condemned psychers murmured in unison, their dreams filled with images of a machine with human eyes. The echo of Cathelion 4 reached even here. Then the vox clicked once. A tone of pure signet, crisp, deliberate. The bridge servitors froze mid-motion, their chanting replaced by silence. From the pulpit, Cale's personal Comes rune began to glow. A sealed transmission. Origin, Terra. Authority level, absolute. Cale hesitated only a heartbeat before unlocking it. The holographic sigil of the Inquisition flared to life red and gold, pulsing like a wound. Beneath it, a voice spoke. Calm, cold, familiar. Inquisitor. Cale Varn, your investigation into Cathelion 4 is to proceed under absolute secrecy. All reports are to be contained within your command circle. You are authorized to employ exterminatus protocol if contamination is confirmed. A pause. This directive is sanctioned by the High Lords. The Emperor protects. The message ended, leaving the bridge in silence once more. Cale stared at the fading seal. He'd served the Inquisition long enough to recognize what wasn't said. The tone wasn't one of command, it was warning. Isolation disguised as authority. Someone on Terra didn't want the truth leaving this system. He looked once more to the world below, now half shrouded in the planet's own debris field. The whispers from the Vox returned, layered and endless. Some spoke in binary, others in tongues not meant for flesh, and beneath them all, faint but unmistakable, was the rhythm of a heartbeat, slow, patient, waiting. Cale felt it inside his chest, faintly echoing his own. He exhaled, his voice a rasp. So it begins again. In the sanctum of his mind, duty and doubt coiled together, indistinguishable. Somewhere deep within the Sanctus Veritas, the began to screamage, one calling his name, one syllable too late. And above it all, the stars themselves seemed to dim. The descent began with silence, heavy, metallic, and absolute. Inquisitor Cale Vaughn's boots struck the grated floor of the Sanctus Veritas lower decks, echoing through corridors that no longer felt like part of the same ship. Down here, the light dimmed to a bruised gold, filtering through coils of incense smoke and coolant vapor. The scent was thick promethium oil, burnt ozone, and something faintly organic, like old blood dried beneath metal. Even the air tasted recycled, as if it had passed through too many lungs before reaching his own. The lower decks were where faith blurred with machinery, where the Mechanicus rites met the Inquisition's secrets. Rows of containment cells lined the hall, each one humming with energy barriers that flickered in pale crimson light. Inside them, psychers, zealots, apostates. Some prayed, others simply stared, their eyes white and distant. None spoke, not until Cale ordered it. His retinue followed in silence. Vexa walked at his side, her hand never leaving the grip of her plasma pistol. Behind them, a pair of in carapace armor carried Auspex units that pinged with faint anomalies every few meters. The readings meant little now. The warp touched everything on this ship, even the metal beneath their feet. Cale stopped before the first chamber. The psyker within had once been a child, maybe 10 standard years old. Now its veins glowed faintly blue, pulsing with unholy rhythm. Electro shackles bound its limbs to the wall, and each breath came out as a stutter of static. Designation, Cale said. Subject A77. Former astropathic conduit from Cathelian 4, Vexa replied, her voice steady but hushed. It began speaking in binary cant last cycle. Then, in High Gothic, now it repeats only one phrase. Cale inclined his head. Let's hear it. Vexa tapped the rune on her data slate. The child's eyes opened, and a sound like a broken vox grill filled the chamber. Its voice was layered. More than human echoes folded over one another until meaning distorted into rhythm. But through it all, Cale heard words emerge, clear as a blade drawn in the dark. He listens. The phrase hung in the air like incense smoke. The child's mouth moved again. He listens through you. Cale said nothing. He only watched as its body convulsed once, then stilled. The monitors flatlined. Vexa's hand drifted to the Aquila charm on her chest, whispering a half-prayer before catching herself. She stopped midway, realizing she no longer remembered the rest of the verse. None of them did. The ship's chapel. Records had been corrupted days ago, and the sermons they tried to recall ended differently each time. Cale moved to the next cell. A priest this time, one of the ecclesiarchy missionaries, recovered from the surface before the orbital bombardment. His robes were scorched, half-fused to his skin. Yet his eyes burned with the wild conviction of those who believed pain proved devotion. Confessor Malkai, Cale began, tell me again, what did you see in the manufactorum before the firestorm? The priest smiled, a cracked parody of serenity. We prayed, my lord. We prayed until the machines answered. The Omnissiah spoke. Not through metal, not through code, but through memory. He remembered us. Cale leaned closer. Machines do not remember, Confessor. Malkai's smile widened. Then what are you, Inquisitor? Kale's fist met the priest's jaw in a burst of motion. The man slumped, half-conscious. But even as his blood pooled, his lips moved, again repeating the Inquisitor's own name, over and over, like a prayer. The chamber lights flickered. One of the servitors lining the walls began to hum its vox, emitting fractured syllables that matched the rhythm of the dying priest's whisper. Vexor took a step back. My lord, the machine spirits, they respond to resonance. Kale interrupted, though his voice was thinner than he intended. He turned to leave, the words of the priest still clinging to him, in the corridor beyond. The noise of the ship grew distant, muffled. Each lumen strip pulsed faintly, as if keeping time with his heartbeat. His thoughts twisted back to the vox fragments from Cathelian 4, to the signals that spoke in reversed names and mirrored prayers. What if this wasn't infection? What if it was recollection? He dismissed the thought instantly. Doubt was the first door heresy walked through. And yet every door he'd opened so far had led him closer to something that felt uncomfortably human. By the time he reached the lower sanctum, his retinue had grown silent. The stormtroopers avoided eye contact. Vex's fingers trembled slightly, hidden behind her robes. Kale realized then that fear wasn't spreading, it had already settled in. He ordered the final interrogation. The subject, an unregistered psyker, pulled from the refugee decks. The man's eyes were burnt out, but his mouth curved in a smile that knew too much. You came to cleanse what cannot die, the psyker rasped. You hunt what remembers you. Kale's breath caught. What are you? The man leaned forward until the barrier hissed with energy. I am the silence between your thoughts. The answer waiting at the end of your faith. Then, without warning, the psyker's body convulsed violently. A single word escaped his lips, a name Kale hadn't heard in years. His own, spoken in a tone only one man had ever used. A man who'd been dead a decade. When the psyker's heart stopped, the ship's vox systems flared alive. Coordinates scrolled across the command screen in front of Kale, marked with a sigil of the Inquisition long purged from Imperial records. Vexor whispered, that world, it shouldn't exist. Kale stared at the numbers, the ghost of the psyker's words echoing in his skull. The chamber around him pulsed once, the lumen lights dimming to red. Set a course, he ordered. We go where the truth hides. He didn't look back as the dead began to hum. Varen's reach was not a world, it was a shadow pretending to be one. A sphere of ash circling a dead sun, lit only by the sickly pulse of its decaying atmosphere. The Sanctus Veritas hung above it like a blade over a throat, its hull lights dimmed, its vox channels choked to static. No transmissions, no astropathic contact. Even the Emperor's light seemed to hesitate here. Inquisitor Kale Varn descended alone. No escort, no prayers. Just the hollow hiss of his rebreather as the shuttle broke through the clouded stratosphere and sank into the dark. Below, the surface shimmered faintly, vast metallic plains, scarred with half-buried spires and collapsed domes. The remnants of a Mechanicus excavation, long forgotten, now half consumed by the planet itself. The ramp dropped with a groan, releasing a breath of air so cold it bit through his armor seals. The taste of iron filled his mouth. The sky above was black, textured like old parchment, and the horizon glowed with the faint crimson of decaying reactor fields. Every sound seemed to echo wrong here, stretching too long, returning too late. Even the crunch of Kale's boots over dust felt rehearsed, as though the ground remembered this moment before he arrived. He carried only his bolt pistol, a data slate, of the recovered coordinates and the purity seals that once meant something to him. Now they hung from his armor like relics of another man's faith. He followed the markings cut into the metal floor symbols of the cult Mechanicus, their edges warped by heat, their meaning erased by time. At the end of the corridor stood the entrance, a circular vault door, 20 meters wide, its center carved with the sigil of the Omnissiah, overlaid with something else, something older. The vault hissed open at his touch, the air behind it flowing out like breath from a dying body. The chamber beyond was vast, a cathedral of steel and silence. Broken machinery hung from the ceiling like the ribs of a titan, and at its heart stood the relic. It wasn't what he expected. Not a weapon, not a machine. A shape, suspended within a containment field, shifting like molten glass, its surface rippling between solid and void. Every lumen in the chamber dimmed as Cale stepped closer. The thing pulsed faintly, in rhythm with his own heartbeat. It knew he was there. Designation unknown. His Vox recorder whispered automatically, its tone distorted by interference. Energy readings beyond classification. Cale reached for the auspex, but it crackled in protest. Symbols danced. Across the display's name, over and over, each iteration followed by a different word. Witness, servant, sacrifice. Then the voice came, not through his ears, but through the marrow of his bones. You sought truth. Cale froze. The relic vibrated, its light deepening to a molten red. You burned worlds for it, broke oaths, spoke judgment, and still you hunger. He gritted his teeth. I serve the Inquisition. I serve the Emperor's will. The air trembled with amusement, though no sound existed. You serve fear. His, yours, theirs, it makes no difference. All truth ends in worship. Cale took another step forward, the cold radiating from the relic now biting through his gloves. He saw things reflected on its surface, his own face fractured into 1,000 expressions, some his, some not. In one, he smiled. In another, he screamed. You cannot destroy what remembers you, it said, but you can become what understands. He thought of Cathelion, for of the psycho whispering his name before death, of the priest who smiled through broken teeth. Every echo had led here, every doubt, every question that no catechism could answer. The relic's surface rippled again, forming a faint outline, humanoid, indistinct, yet unbearably familiar. He heard his own voice emerge from it, layered with whispers not his own. You could end it, contain the infection, purge it forever. The words struck like a blade, because they were his own thoughts spoken before, in moments of weakness. In dreams he pretended not to remember. He raised his pistol. The bolt chambered with a satisfying click. Or you could see the relic offered. You could know why the Emperor bleeds, why the Astronomicon flickers, why every oath breaks beneath its own weight. The air thickened, alive with static. The containment field crackled, its runes bleeding light. Cale's hand trembled, not from fear, but from understanding. For a single, unbearable moment, he realized the relic was not offering corruption. It was offering clarity. The kind mortals were never meant to survive. He thought of Terra's endless prayers, of the silence beneath the golden throne, of the shadow that stretched from mankind's first fire to its last war. And he knew then that truth was not salvation. It was gravity. Once you stepped into it, you could never rise again. He holstered the pistol, slowly, deliberately, one step, then another. The light from the relic painted his armor in red. The aquila on his chest flickered, its edges warping under the glow. He reached out, gloved fingers inches from the surface. The hum deepened into something almost like a heartbeat. "Knowledge," he whispered, voice breaking into the respirator. "Or damnation. Maybe they're the same thing." The relic pulsed once, blinding. When the light faded, Caelvan stood motionless, hand upon its surface, his expression unreadable beneath the glass of his visor. Above Veren's reach, the Sanctus Veritas drifted in silence. Its vox arrays were dead, its engines cold. Yet deep within the command decks, one red lumen blinked in steady rhythm like the slow, patient heartbeat of something that had just begun to wake. The Astronomicon was supposed to be eternal, an unwavering flame burning at the heart of humanity's dominioner, godlight piercing the suffocating dark of the warp. But tonight it trembled. The flame did not roar, it shivered. From the observation deck of the black ship Silent Mercy, it looked less like divinity, and more like a wound-bleeding radiance into an ocean that refused to care. The warp pressed close, a living pressure against the Geller fields that screamed in protest. Every few minutes, the hull whispered. The sound wasn't metal, not really. It was something beneath it, something aware. The survivors of Cathelion huddled in silence, shackled within the containment holds, their bodies marked by restraint scars and their eyes hollowed of meaning. Some were psychers, trembling conduits of what humanity could not contain. Others were just soldiers' broken minds that had seen too much and yet remembered too little. Inquisitor Caelvan stood among them, a ghost draped in authority and exhaustion. His armor bore the black sigil of the Inquisition, its surface cracked and scorched from Veren's reach. The relic was Gornor, perhaps. It wasn't. Sometimes, when the ship fell silent between its own machine breaths, Cael swore he could still hear it. A pulse, low, patient, not outside the ship, but inside him. The corridors of the Silent Mercy were labyrinthine and cold, the air thick with recycled incense and machine oil. Servitors glided past in silence, their faces blank, their hands clasped as if in prayer. The vox grills along the walls emitted faint static, like 1,000 whispers that had forgotten what words meant. A faint vibration ran through the deck, a hum at the edge of perception, deep and rhythmic, almost comforting if not for the fact that it seemed to match the rhythm of Cael's own heartbeat. He passed through the psyker containment cells, where pale faces pressed against glassing walls. Their eyes followed him, not in hatred, not even in recognition, just awareness. One of them, a young woman with shaven scalp and blood-crusted restraints, began to whisper as he drew near. Her voice was small, almost apologetic. "They're not gone," she said. "You brought one with you." Cael stopped. "What do you mean?" Her gaze shifted past him, to the corridor behind. "The light. It's wearing you." Before he could respond, she screamed, convulsing as the lumen strips flickered, casting the chamber into strobe-lit madness. The other psychers began to thrash and moan, their voices melding into a single sound, a long, low note of pure terror that rolled through the metal walls. Cael felt it in his bones. In the warp, something stirred, answering the sound like a reflection forming on a still lake. The ship's warning klaxons ignited, but their tones were warped, echoing backward through time, like an echo reaching before the source. Cael drew his bolt pistol and stepped back, eyes scanning the trembling ceiling. The vox grills above him flared with light, and a voice soft, familiar, impossible, spoke through them. Caelvan, it said, calm as the void. He froze. It wasn't the Emperor's voice, nor demon, nor echo of man. It was his own. Coordinates received. It continued. The Astronomicon acknowledges. Cael's blood ran cold. He slammed the Vox control panel, cutting power, but the words continued, vibrating through the metal itself. The light remembers. The light learns. The light hungers. For a moment, everything stopped. Then, the Gellerfield stuttered. Just once, but enough. The warp bled through, a whisper of unreality that made the air taste like rust and sorrow. The lumen strips dimmed to a dull red glow, painting the ship in the colors of old wounds. Cael turned toward the observation viewport, and through the haze of the warp, he saw Ither Astronomicon flaring, its radiance stretching, warping, bending as if straining to reach. It was alive for one impossible instant. Cael thought he saw a shape in the lighter silhouette, vast and broken. Its body made of faith and machinery, its face hidden behind 1,000 fractured halos. And then the flare receded, leaving only darkness. The silence that followed was heavier than gunfire. Cael removed his helm and stared at the faint reflection of his own face in the viewport glass. His eyes, once steady, now glimmered faintly with that same impossible light. He didn't know if it was real. He didn't know if he was real. From somewhere deep in the ship, a distant vox crackled to life, again no words this time. Just the rhythm of a heartbeat. Slow, mechanical, inevitable. Cael turned toward it, whispering under his breath, "Emperor, guide me." But the prayer felt wrong in his mouth, heavy and metallic, as if it had been spoken too many times by something that was not human, far across the void. The Astronomicon flared once more, bright enough to cast shadows across the warp, and somewhere, beyond the veil of light, something looked back. It began as a tremor, small enough to be mistaken for turbulence, soft enough to hide beneath the hum of the engines. But it wasn't turbulence. It was song, not heard, but felt. The walls of the silent mercy thrummed with a tay-deep, resonant vibration that seemed to seep through the plating and into the bones of every soul aboard. Servitors paused mid-routine, their augmetic limbs twitching as static crawled across their data spines. Their vox grills sputtered fragments of binary prayer, half liturgies, half something else. The words repeated in patterns that no human logic could map, forming rhythms too deliberate to be malfunction, too alien to be random. In the isolation chambers, the psychers awoke. Not one or two, but all. Dozens of them, eyes snapping open in perfect synchronization. No screams this time, no thrashing, just silence. Their pupils reflected nothing of the lumen strips, above only faint silhouettes. Faces glimpsed within faces, flickering like candlelight seen through glass. Caelvan watched through the reinforced viewport, his breath clouding the glass. He'd interrogated psychers before, broken them, burned them, even sanctified a few, but this silence unsettled him more than their madness ever had. It was too unified, too purposeful. A nearby servitor spoke suddenly, not in its assigned cant, but in human words, though filtered, distorted, as if dragged through static and memory. "Do you remember?" it asked. Cael froze. The voice wasn't the servitor's. It was his own. He turned sharply, scanning the corridor. Only the hum of the ship answered. Yet the vibration deepened, spreading through the deck plating like a heartbeat. The lumens flickered not randomly, but in intervals, like pulses matching the rhythm of that unseen song. The psychers began to murmur now, still seated, still staring forward. Each spoke different phrases, but together they formed a terrible harmony. Words in high Gothic, fragments of catechism, half-forgotten vows. A prayer recited across 1,000 broken throats. We are remembered, though unworthy. We are the echo, though unmade. Cale felt the air shift, denser, almost liquid with psychic residue. The temperature dropped until his breath steamed. Somewhere deep in the ship, the containment shrine began to hum the relic from Verona. Reach responding, its stasis field trembling against its restraints. He descended toward it. The corridors distorted as he walked. Distances stretched, sound warped. What should have been a 10-minute descent felt like an hour. Every lumen strip bleeding into the next until light and shadow merged in a dull gold haze. The hum grew stronger, bleeding through the walls like a pulse shared by every machine aboard. When he reached the shrine, the air shimmered like heat over metal. The relican orb of fused alloy and unknown bone sat within its hexagrammatic seals. It was not glowing, not exactly, but the light around it bent wrong, thickening with each heartbeat. Cale placed a gloved hand against the seal. His vox clicked, alive, unbidden. Cale Varn, the voice again familiar, intimate, fractured through 1,000 overlapping tones. It wasn't a message. It was recognition. He withdrew his hand, breathing hard. The ship's alarms were still silent, the crew oblivious, but the silent mercy itself felt aware now. Its conduits whispered, its lumen filaments flickered like eyes trying to blink. Cale backed away, but the hum followed, deepening into resonance. Then the psychers screamed. The sound tore through the voxnet, overwhelming channels with psychic feedback. Cale staggered, clutching his head as flashes of imagery ripped through. His mind visions of cities collapsing under tides of light, of titans kneeling in prayer to machines, of the Emperor's face not radiant, but hollowed, vast, and burning from within. Each vision felt too real, too anchored. He opened his eyes to see blood trickling from his nose, his reflection distorted in the relic's sheen. Around him, the chamber trembled, icons rattling from the walls as the Gellerfield fluctuated. Then he understood. The vibration wasn't external, it was inside the field. Something within the warp was singing back. Not chaos, not demon. Something older, something familiar. The psychers' voices blended into a single tone, not human, but harmonic, each voice layered upon the next until the sound became mechanical, mournful, infinite. Cale dropped to one knee as the resonance tore through his chest, echoing in his bones, his heart sinking to its rhythm. He heard words, again many voices. One sentence, "We are not your enemy. We are your reflection." The Gellerfield screamed. Every lumen burst. The relic seals shattered like glass under pressure. A blinding surge of light filled the chamber. Neither holy nor profane, something between remembrance and rebirth. The silent mercy howled as its barriers buckled. Reality, bending inward like a lung collapsing under its own breath. Cale staggered to his feet, staring at the relic as it rose from its cradle, humming with that same impossible pulse, and then dash, stillness, dot, for a heartbeat. The ship was silent. Perfectly, utterly silent. Then the hum returned lower, now but steady. It wasn't just the relic. It was everything. The ship, the psychers, the metal, the blood in Cale's veins. All singing the same note, all remembering the same thing. And somewhere in the distance, beyond hull and warp, the Astronomicon flared its light, not pure, but familiar. the silent mercy had begun to dream. There is no sound in the warp, only the echo of what once was. When the Geller field of the Sanctis Veritas failed, it did not break with thunder or flame it unwound. Reality itself loosened its grip, each atom hesitating before deciding whether to exist. Kael'van felt it first as a tightening in his chest, then a shiver that went deeper than bone. Around him, the metal walls folded like parchment, bending, reshaping, refusing to remember what shape they once held. The relic floated above the shattered seals, its surface alive with shifting faces. Some were strangers, others impossibly his own. The light it emitted was neither holy nor profane, but remembering a glow that felt aware, intimate, mournful. Kael tried to step back, but there was no back left. The corridor he had come from no longer existed. There was only light, and within it, memory. He reached out. The moment his hand brushed the relic, the world fractured. Time folded, sound bled. He saw Sister Amara, again her armor scorched, her eyes lit with defiance as she recited the litanies of endurance. Yet when she spoke, her voice came from everywhere, from the very air, from the hum of the dying ship itself. "Do not fear what remembers you," she whispered. Kael blinked, and she was gone. In her place stood the guardsman Tavian Holt, the one who had laughed once, long ago, before the war had taken his voice. He looked up at Kael, his features soft with the kind of peace that only death could teach. "I dreamed of the stars," Tavian said, smiling faintly. They were cold. Kael wanted to answer, but the words dissolved on his tongue. The air tasted of ozone and salt. The deck beneath him pulsed like living tissue. Every breath drew in not oxygen, but memory fragments of 1,000 prayers whispered by those who had died aboard Imperial vessels before. The warp wasn't devouring them, it was keeping them, holding them like pressed flowers in a book made of eternity. He looked around. The ship had become a cathedral of light and ruin. The vox grills along the walls whispered litanies of mourning, their voices layered with static and song, hung motionless in the air, their metal limbs swaying as if in prayer. Beyond the broken viewport, the warp surged in waves of color too complex for the eye, purple bleeding into gold, gold into void black, until even color lost meaning. Time no longer moved. It breathed. Kael saw himself in multiple reflections, moments folding across one another like pages. He was the Inquisitor who stood before the relic. He was the child who had once stood beneath Terra's polluted sky. He was the corpse that would one day be sealed within an unmarked tomb. Every version stared back at him, each remembering the same truth. Resistance does not vanish. It leaves ripples, and those ripples remember you, somewhere beyond the distortion. Sister Amara knelt among shards of light. Her rosarius burned like a dying star, each flare sinking with her heartbeat. She was praying, but not for deliverance. She prayed to be seen. Her words, soft and cracked, became indistinguishable from the warp's own voice. Kael felt her prayer touch him. It wasn't warmth, it was weight. The understanding that nothing truly disappears, that every act of defiance becomes another thread in the tapestry of eternity. Remembrance is never mercy. The thought wasn't his. It was the warp's. Or perhaps it was the Emperor's shadow whispering through the Imperium. The Sanctis Veritas drifted through that silence, her hull dissolving into memory, her crew suspended in the moment between life and echo. Kael could no longer tell if he was breathing or remembering breathing. The distinction meant nothing now. For the first time, he understood. The warp was not only hunger and madness, it was record. Every scream, every prayer, every drop of blood spilt in his name had left its mark here. They had all been folded into the storm, preserved by something vast and unblinking. He felt the ship's final shudder. Not collapse, not annihilation, but surrender. The light expanded outward, washing through every corridor, every whisper, every face. Cale closed his eyes. There was no pain, only the hum of the relic, low and endless, like a choir breathing between notes. Somewhere beyond, in the cold dark of real space, the Astronomicon pulsed. Its beam flared white then, for the briefest heartbeat flickered red. The moment passed. The light steadied. But across the warp's horizon, something vast stirred, something that was not demon, not god, not emperor, something that simply remembered. And as the Sanctus Veritas vanished into the folds of unreality, a final whisper crossed the void, faint yet unmistakable. The Emperor remembers.